Today we will be talking to Laura Heath.
Laura Heath is a registered pharmacist, a college professor, an integrative nutrition health coach, and she has a specialty in the psychology of emotional eating. So how did a hospital pharmacist get into the area of nutrition, and how has she found that changing her relationship with food has changed her life? I hope you'll enjoy this conversation as we dig deeper into the psychology of emotional eating from a pharmacist's perspective.
Laura Heath is with me today. Thanks for joining me, Laura.
Hi, Lindsay. It's so great to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. One of the things that I really love to do on this channel, and one of the focuses of this channel, is to try to display or interview people who are looking at healthcare differently or trying to do something a bit different. And so you are a pharmacist and you work in a hospital, but you are also a mom and you also have some interest in nutrition. So could you initially, we are still in the COVID-19 pandemic. So could you just tell us about what has your experience been? You're from Ontario, Canada.
Mm-hmm.
What's it been like in Ontario as a pharmacist, as a mother? What has your experience been like?
Well, I'll start with saying I'm pretty type A, which I think is typical of a lot of pharmacists, right? So I'm all about the rules and following the rules and being accepting of the rules being there for a reason. So we were always very diligent with everything that came up in terms of what we should do to be safe and to protect my family. First and foremost, I was looking at my immediate family with my in-laws and my mom, and just above all thinking in the environment that I work in a hospital, working in ICU as well, I must protect the safety of my immediate family and my mom, and my parents. So that really was a stressor, that you have to work through in your mind to be like, I have to do this job, I have to do it well, but I also need to be protective of my family. So of course, just like every other person in healthcare during this pandemic, there's that uneasiness of, am I bringing something home? Am I being careful enough? But then there's also, this is my duty to work during this time, work a little bit more than I had, because I balance my business that I run with health coaching and the hospital pharmacy work, but did a little bit more of that hospital work because our numbers were up in Ontario for most of the pandemic. There were dips because we had non-elective we had elective surgeries put on hold a number of times, right? So sometimes the numbers didn't look like they were that high, but the patients were sick and the precautions that went along with things made it, just a more challenging work environment, just like everybody in healthcare. So, it's been an experience, just like all of us, where you've got to roll with the punches, be okay with the safety measures in place, which was a problem for me at first when we didn't have masks and we didn't know, when I think back to my initial response to, just work here, but we don't actually have any masks yet, but don't worry, it'll be fine. Knowing that I didn't know enough to know whether this was going to be okay, but things like that, I really had to manage my mind around, because until we could literally get masks in stock, we weren't protected. So your patient care experience and whether you were face to face with the patient was really impacted by that at first. So.
Wow. And you do play a more clinical role at the pharmacy, right? You're not just kind of isolated dispensing medications. Is that right?
Right. For sure. Like, I don't have anything to do with dispensing at all. It's very much a clinical role. So whether that's in liaison with the other healthcare providers, like the OTs and the PTs and the physios, the physicians, the nurses. So you're out on the nursing units, whether it's rounds, whether it's interviewing patients, which is mostly done by our technicians to get a BPMH. But then that follow up with patients, if there's any clarification, for sure. There's some time in the pharmacy where there's some hands-on, computer work, but you're out and about for sure.
And what is it like now? So, vaccinations across Canada, I think we're over 65% now for first doses, and cases seem to be falling. What is it like now in Ontario?
It feels like we're coming out. Like there's hope, everyone's excited. I've been fully vaccinated for a while now, working in the hospital. My kids have first doses. My husband's getting a second dose on Tuesday. So we're really close to feeling the ability to have some normalcy back. And then the hospital environment, it just feels better. The mood is better. Our ICU doesn't have any COVID patients.
Wow.
And so all of those things kind of just move towards a place where you're feeling hopeful for the future, to the new normal to be sort of normal.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And that's the feeling in British Columbia here too. And so I'm glad to hear that, because I know Ontario, I mean, you had quite a lockdown there and kids weren't in school. And I think that it was quite intense in Ontario.
Right. Yeah. So my kids are online. They're finishing up their year. They're online.
Yeah.
My son has grad on Tuesday as a drive-through. So, we stay in the car, nobody's getting out. He gets out to get his diploma masked. That's excitement because it's something.
Yeah.
My hair is usually this much shorter than normal. So I haven't been to the hair salon in months because we are just stage one, coming out of our, sort of in stage one of our lockdown release, which is still pretty locked down. So it's been a long haul in Ontario, but you do see the light at the end of the tunnel, the ability to be outside in small groups now. And there's a lot of joy that comes with that, to have some of those normalcies back.
Yeah, definitely. No, definitely looking forward to, days when we don't have to see, the daily or weekly update and case counts and all that kind of thing. Right. So starting to be able to kind of plan life a little bit better. And, that kind of leads me to the conversation around, how have we as Canadians, or just as people in the world who have been through this pandemic, how have we been taking care of ourselves during this pandemic? And I remember early on in the pandemic, there was a joke, I don't know if you heard this, about like the COVID-19, like the 19 pounds that people are gaining. And people kind of joked about it because we were all at home and women were cooking bread, right? And there was, all this kind of thing going on. But actually now we are seeing that there is data behind that. I think that, one of the studies that I looked at this morning, I think it showed that about 30% of Canadians have gained between 10 to 20 pounds during the pandemic unintentionally.
Right.
So as a pharmacist, and now someone who is educated and working also in the area of nutrition, what are your concerns with that? And are you seeing
when you look at those statistics, because Stats Canada has put out some information, as well as quite an interesting study of almost 10,000 people out of Dalhousie, where they did look at these statistics to show that weight gain is for real, the COVID-19. So even though we joked about it, I used it in my hashtags, COVID-19, like, losing the COVID-19, gaining the COVID-19. It really is an accurate representation of Canada, at least for our data. And when you look, there's UK data, there's very much US data. So across the board, it's consistent that we've gained weight, that we've in survey said, yes, I've eaten much more junk food during this time, as much as 40% more than I did before. That's kind of the statistic that's coming out. Yes, we've drank way more alcohol. So all of these coping strategies that we've used tend to be things to buffer the discomfort of COVID and the uncertainty of COVID and the stress of COVID. So whether it's cannabis use, whether it's alcohol use, whether it's food, all of them have gone up, and all of them have gone up significantly. So of course, there are all sorts of concerns around patients accessing primary care, getting their elective surgeries done because we had to pause. But there's also these health risks associated with the fact that we are 20 pounds heavier and still have the comorbidities that go along with that weight gain. Of course, for myself in the work that I do in coaching, a lot of what I look at is the behind the scenes of why did I use food as a tool to manage this difficult time. But as we can see from the stats, it's not uncommon. Many of us have turned to food, alcohol, or some combination thereof to be able to kind of cope or feel better. And the end result being a temporary feeling better in that moment. But of course, then the health risks associated with this long-term have yet to be determined. We'll probably continue to study some of this to see, can we lose this weight? Are there impacts from us eating this way for a prolonged period of time? It's going to be very interesting to see the continued data that comes out of this.
Mm-hmm. And I think that like the glaring thing to me at the beginning of the pandemic was that, there was this discussion of, do we need to lock down? Do we not need to lock down? And I mean, that's not what we're discussing in this interview. But my concern at the beginning of the pandemic was like, well, over 40% of Canadians have a chronic illness already. And often that can be associated with, diabetes, with weight, with, heart conditions, right? So we are actually much sicker than we even know. And that was before the pandemic. Now we've been through this and we know that even just the stress of the pandemic, right? And then the ways that we cope with that stress, the different hormones that are involved in stress. I know insomnia, a lot of people have been dealing with insomnia and anxiety. And so now coming out of this, if you weren't an emotional eater before COVID-19, I think, many of us are now, or maybe even the majority of us. So Laura, how do we define emotional eating? What is this other than just, I feel terrible, I'm going to eat chocolate? That's kind of my understanding.
I mean, the simple definition of emotional eating is when you eat for any reason other than hunger or satiation.
Okay.
Right. So if you're putting food in your body and it's not because you're physically hungry to get to a point of feeling satisfied, then that's emotional eating. And that's maybe sounds pretty broad. And it's probably why many of us up to this point wouldn't even have identified as emotional eaters until now we can sit back a few months into the pandemic and go, oh yeah, I totally had extra wine during the pandemic. Actually every night when I came home, is that a thing that has happened for me? I went to the grocery store more often and picked up the extra bag of chips and the chocolates. And that's proven in the data that has happened. So emotional eating is using food as a tool to buffer or suppress or basically feel better, to block emotions that you have, to basically use food as a tool to not have to feel the discomfort of the emotions that are maybe present, but not able to be, that you don't want to experience, or to just buffer them from even knowing that they're there altogether. I'm just going to eat food and then not even acknowledge the fact that I am stressed beyond belief.
And as a mom, I realize that I am an emotional eater when I haven't had enough sleep, or when I'm stressed, because of the kids or something like that. And up until that point, I did not know that I was an emotional eater. And you have a story where you started to recognize this pattern in your life as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it happened literally over a period of 18 months to 2 years. It took me a couple of years as a healthcare professional who had already started some training in integrative nutrition and, health coaching, to recognize that what I was doing was very much emotional eating, turning to food to buffer the discomfort of a stressful day. So I would basically go to my 9-to-5 hospital pharmacy job that was very busy, worked a lot in an oncology clinic, a very busy oncology clinic where, overtime was not uncommon. It was a common occurrence to have overtime. It wasn't uncommon to not have a lunch, not have a break. And of course, the need for making no mistakes in oncology at any time because of the high risk of error in that area. So I just realized with time that stress was being managed by me by literally driving to the grocery store after work each night. And I would find myself collecting the same foods over a period of probably 4 or 5 nights of the week, where it was, junk, always junk, chocolate, maybe some wedge fries, some chips. And I would literally eat them on the way home with a couple of thoughts in mind. One, I don't want to share because I need these right now. And if I go home, everyone else is going to want these. So I have to eat them now. But also just, this feels better. Right. Because temporarily it gives you that little dopamine hit, right? You get the high from feeling better. You're trying to ease the day. And for me, the ease I was looking for was, I wanted to come down from the stress of a busy day where I had that feeling of overwhelm, but I couldn't articulate that that's what it was.
Mhm.
Coming into my home where I was going to do round 2 of mom, basketball driver, supper maker, lunch packer,
Yeah.
homework helper. So there wasn't going to be a chance to kind of decompress. So
Mhm.
food was the decompressing.
Mhm.
And that pattern continued for, as I say, a period of almost 2 years before I went, oh, wow, this is related.
Wow.
The way that I'm thinking and feeling about my day is translating into me taking the action of using food to
Mhm.
buffer and suppress my emotions.
Mhm.
This is emotional eating. And I got to get to the bottom of figuring
Wow.
out how to stop this, both from a mental perspective, because the chatter in your brain is incessant,
Yeah.
and also from a intellectual perspective, because you are an intelligent person who knows darn well what to eat,
Yeah.
knows darn well what the consequence is of eating poorly. And
Mhm.
then also, of course, just the physical perspective of holding more weight on your body than you really desire to have,
Mhm.
and the potential medical issues that go with that. And in fact, I don't mind sharing with you that at that point, at the peak, my blood pressure was borderline high. So my
Mm.
weight was that, 10,
Yep.
15 pounds higher.
Mhm.
And the blood pressure was that little bit higher to be on the border of, oh, we got to watch this because you could,
Mhm.
need to start an antihypertensive.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think that, people need to realize that healthcare professionals are not immune to this, right? This is
Hmm.
something that even though we know the consequences of these kinds of life choices, but the types of maybe profession that we have, the types of stress that we're under, we're definitely not immune to this. And you spoke about that dopamine hit, and I think that's what we were all seeking during the pandemic, right? Can you explain that a little bit? Why we seek out these foods, and what is that dopamine about? Like, what is?
Yeah. I mean, our brains are wired to basically find the path of least resistance to feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
And so we quickly learn and develop a neural pathway that takes us to the fastest and most easy route to feeling better. And
Mm-hmm.
when you think about historically, when we were hunter gatherers,
Yeah.
we looked for berries and sort of sweet types of
Mm-hmm.
fruits to be able to satiate ourselves and keep ourselves having enough body fat on us to get through the periods when there wasn't fresh food available. But now we have all of this highly palatable food readily available,
Yeah.
and the dopamine hit is intense
Yeah.
and it feels good in the moment. So we're looking for that hit of pleasure. Historically, our bodies know we must seek out food to survive from
Yeah.
that hunter gatherer life.
Yeah.
But now the food that we seek out isn't a few berries on a bush. It's so intensely full of sugar,
Yeah.
flour, and processed foods. So
Mhm.
with that comes this cycle of then what I call over hunger and
Okay.
over desire. Two things are going on. And I mean, over hunger is just coming right back to the science of hormones. When you keep the sugar high in your body, your insulin response is high
Yeah.
and you are always hungry. And so you feed yourself more, and then the dopamine hit feels good and the sugar crashes and you need more sugar and the insulin goes up. And insulin is the perfect fat storage hormone, of
Yeah.
course. So
Yeah.
we hold onto extra weight when we do that.
Mm-hmm.
The desire stays high because we get that dopamine hit, right? So we get the dopamine hit, but it doesn't last very long. And then there's kind of a letdown afterwards. So I know how to get it again.
Yeah.
I know I need more food.
Yeah.
I need something highly palatable again, something that was so delicious and it just tasted so good in the moment. And so we do it over and over again. Then we can't even trust our hunger signals at that point. I mean, our ghrelin and leptin that kind of tell
Yeah.
us you're hungry,
Yeah.
you're full, they are blocked by that high insulin that's always circulating. And we can't even tell if we're physically hungry. So, what
Hmm.
are we using to decide? Our emotional hunger. When
Hmm.
I left work every day and ate chocolates or chips or whatever it was all the way home, I was not physically hungry. I was emotionally hungry, and it did the trick just fine in the moment. It wasn't until afterward where you have that pause and go, oh, but this feels terrible. Like physically, I feel terrible. Mentally, I feel terrible. And the chatter that can then ensue for us around the way we speak to ourselves about, oh my gosh, why did I do that to myself? I know better than that. And that nasty way of speaking to ourselves does nothing other than perpetuate the cycle, because you want to feel better. And the way you feel better is to give yourself the next dopamine hit. And you do that with more highly palatable food because your desire stays so high. So you're in this perpetual circle. Kind of once you get in it, you almost need the full stop to go, oh, man, I got to just put on the brakes and figure out how to get control of the insulin, the ghrelin, the leptin, the dopamine, all of it. And then, of course, the way that I'm thinking and feeling, so that I ultimately have control over what I'm doing, as opposed to me feeling like my body is making these decisions without my brain even being involved.
Yeah. And I think that, some people might feel like this is a little bit intimidating, as far as, if they've gained, say, 20 pounds, or maybe they want to lose 40 pounds or 50 pounds. I mean, it's very easy to gain 10 or 15 pounds. And then we do start to see, like you said, we start to see how it already starts affecting blood pressure. It starts affecting insulin resistance. But also there's good data on even if you just lose, say, 5% of your weight, we see good effects from even a small weight loss, right? And if we can start to change our emotional or our relationship with food, and I think what you're kind of talking about a little bit here is also essentially sugar addiction, right?
For sure.
Then that's something that it is attainable, and we don't have to kind of think, well, I have to lose, 50 pounds or something like that. What you're talking about is getting to the root of the issue of, why am I seeking these foods? Changing the way that your mind is, the relationship that you have with food, right? So how does someone, if they want to change their relationship with food, if someone comes to you and they just don't know where to start, what would you kind of say to them?
Well, I mean, there's two pieces, right? There's the food piece, and we look at how we eat. But I think when you look at the diet industry, they only look at the food piece in general, right? Eat this many points, have this many macros, calculate this many calories. And for a while, you maybe can do that with some success, but you are absolutely using resistance and willpower to get you through. I can't have this. I can't have this. Oh my gosh, I want that so bad. No, you can't do it. And for sure, you're going to have a relapse at some point if you haven't also looked at the other piece, which is managing your mind. What is it in my mind that is driving me to take this action? Why do I have such desire for these foods? Why do I get to a point where maybe I have lost 5 pounds and then sabotage it all and end up 10 pounds heavier? Well, there is something behind that needs to get investigated. So when I work with people, there's a couple of things that I do. One is, let's just take the sugar out for a bit. Like, for real, let's take it out. You're not going to die. Let's take the sugar out.
For how long? It's like, we're coming out of a pandemic. So is it like a week, or what do you suggest?
Well, I mean, I have a couple of programs that I do as programs that, a 5-day sugar detox that people can join anytime.
5 days.
And I tell people, when they do 5 days, they're not going to reap all of the benefits. It's just to get a sense of, what would it feel like if I took this out and let my body actually be able to feel hunger, actually have insulin levels come down, and be able to trust my own hunger signals again, and maybe have that desire start to peter out. Is it going to be gone in 5 days after a lifetime of a neural pathway that says, give me the next hit? It's not. So I make sure to say, let's just test this out. Let's see how it feels. Then I do have a longer program where I use something called Whole30. So that's like a nationally recognized, basically, elimination program. And I am a Whole30 certified coach.
Yeah, and I should say that you are a pharmacist, but now you have done training in nutrition to do this kind of work, because we don't get this kind of training in pharmacy school. right?
That's right. Yeah. So I've done, my Whole30 certification, a life coach certification, a nutrition certification as a health coach through the Institute for Integrative Nutrition.
Yeah.
But then I've also done the psychology of emotional eating as kind of an add-on to that.
Okay.
Recognizing from my own experience and from my clients' experience that, okay, sure, you can take sugar out, but if you still don't address the underlying, what am I thinking and what am I feeling?
Yeah.
That makes me turn to food, then you end up going back to that same behavior. The addictive properties of the sugar, sure, that's part of it, but also the fact that there's something about the way that you're thinking and feeling that drives you to take action that sabotages yourself. Let's get to the root of that. And so with that, some of that teaching comes into all of my Whole30 programs that I run, because I run them exclusively for emotional eaters. So people who actually have identified, I think I'm doing this because of an emotional attachment to food. So let's work on both pieces. Let's see what happens when you take sugar and flour. So we actually take wheat flour out as well.
Okay.
What happens when you take those out? The main reason being, from an emotional eating point of view, is because much of that breaks down into a simple carb that gets absorbed very quickly with the same response as a natural sugar that we overconsume. And then the other piece is, now let's figure out what are the thoughts and feelings behind these behaviors that have probably led to us, in most cases, overeating. So where most of the time, if we're holding more weight than we want because we're emotionally eating, it's because we're overeating in some capacity. So Whole30 has nothing to do with weight loss, but it does have everything to do with looking at what is my emotional relationship with food. So we're not trying to specifically measure what's going to happen on the scale. We are trying to quiet down that chatter by getting the sugar out. So stopping that desire, like literally turning that desire down, like you turn a knob down so you can't hear that chatter in your voice.
Yeah.
Once you have that desire down, then let's listen to what the thoughts are about why you needed it in the first place, because they're still going to be there. If I had food, this would be a lot better to handle. If I could just have a glass of wine, it wouldn't be so stressful to have to take out the garbage and do all the work around here, or whatever happens to come up in your, sometimes we don't even know what's in our head. So really uncovering what's behind this behavior that we don't want to continue to do.
I love this, because how many people have tried diet after diet after diet, and they end up failing, and then they retry and they fail again, and they just feel worse about themselves because they're not assessing, they're not dealing with the root cause, which is, why are you eating that food in the first place? And I mean, society hasn't really helped us. You go to the grocery store, and the amount of manufactured foods that are even often cheaper than the good foods, right?
Yeah.
Are so accessible. And I don't know, I mean, I've even noticed that with the way that we're even producing fruit these days, like the fruit is much sweeter to me than it used to be. Like there's some apples I can't even handle because they just are so sweet, and it's like sugar is all around us. And so, just having the tools to realize, what type of foods are, I'm sure you talk about maybe lower glycemic index foods. Is that maybe part of the Whole30?
Well, when I work with people and we move out of Whole30 basically ends up being lower glycemic index foods, because you're basically eating whole foods. I mean, you're eating any meats or fish, healthy fats, you're eating any vegetables, you're eating fruits, but as a portion of your meal, not as the bulk of your meal. And it's really that simple. So there's not much in there that is high glycemic. So it's not touted as a diet, and it's not touted as a low carb diet. But when you eat in a Whole30 way, you basically end up having a lower glycemic index plate, and lower, obviously lower sugar on your plate, because you've taken all sugars out other than those that would occur naturally in fruits and vegetables.
And one of the other things I think is really unique is that you are a pharmacist, and I have seen other people, other professionals online and in different spaces trying to coach people on, different diets, things like this. And it can be quite dangerous, I think, because when you start to see people lose weight, sometimes it can affect their medications. Like, for example, I'll say the ketogenic diet. Okay. Nothing against the ketogenic diet,
Sure.
but that can really have an effect on your medication. And when you start to make these kinds of changes, you as a pharmacist and also now as a wellness coach, you can counsel your clients or your patients as to, I guess they're your clients, as to, okay, well, if you're going to do this and you've lost this amount of weight, maybe you should have a look at, your blood pressure medication, or, have you had that experience with people before? Or is that something that you also kind of have a look at when you work with someone?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, because, when you go searching for somebody to help coach you on Whole30, it's evident from that Whole30 page that I'm a pharmacist. That's part of your credentials.
Yeah.
So I do end up having a lot of healthcare professionals kind of be in my groups, I think, because they recognize, okay, she has that background. This isn't just a woo-woo thing. I'm going to get, an educated person to train me as an educated person. So that's the first piece. But the second piece is that there are a lot of other professionals that tend to follow you who aren't healthcare professionals, but they follow you because they trust that factor that comes with being a pharmacist. And, I have a one-on-one client whom I spoke to this week, actually, and she is off 2 of her blood pressure meds with the 3rd one tapering off right now. And for sure, we wanted to be on that and monitoring it. I mean, she's at 55 to 60 pounds off since the start of her journey in her weight loss. So, she started working with me as somebody who identified as an emotional eater. Then we kind of moved into something called food freedom. Like, how do I live in freedom from this emotional eating that has taken over my life? And then moved into, hey, I'm losing weight as I do all these things. I want to keep going and get to a healthy BMI. I want to get to a healthy weight. And I'm going to do that in conjunction with your medical practitioner, whomever that is, because as somebody who's on 3 blood pressure medications, we want to monitor, because chances are good your blood pressure is going down. 2 of the girls in my last group coaching had their blood pressure meds decreased while we were on it. So we make sure to kind of have that information out ahead of time to be able to be monitoring those things closely and adjusting so that we don't end up with a problem from actually losing weight. The other obvious population are diabetics. And for sure, somebody going into even a 5-day sugar detox, if they're an insulin user and you are a coach and you don't understand what's going to happen to their blood sugars, that can be a dangerous situation. So for sure, I think having that knowledge, working in hospital for years with people with diabetes every single day, that's so helpful on the journey of how to help people, but also to make sure that they're safe in that transition as they for sure have to decrease their insulin, for sure have to look at coming off of some of their diabetes medications. I have somebody right now who is kind of classified as pre-diabetic. So, we're watching her really closely as she does this work with me so that for sure she gets to reap the benefits of potentially losing weight on the journey, but also does so safely so that she's monitored appropriately. And it's not that somebody who is a coach and doesn't have that medical background can't make sure that somebody else is responsible for that. But sometimes that might not happen, right? To maybe there's not the insight to know, oh, you have a hemoglobin A1C of 8, 9, 15, which is what somebody told me last week who was inquiring about my services. Wow, we really have to make sure that we're working in conjunction with your healthcare providers while we do this work.
No, that's so important. And I think that it's also important for people to realize that, you don't have to wait for it to be a huge problem to seek out help. So I knew after my son was born, within a few months, I mean, I wasn't overweight, but I knew I was an emotional eater because I was eating M&Ms like constantly, right? And, we don't have to wait until we have this massive problem. Like we have, type 2 diabetes and we're on insulin. There are signs that our body tells us. And even in our minds, if we just start asking ourselves some questions like, wait a minute, why am I going for this food? Of course I like to eat chocolate, or I like to eat this cheesecake, but why is this happening? And, if someone can talk to someone like you and start to assess this, then you can kind of catch it before it becomes like an A1C of 15, an A1C of 16. And this is, I mean, essentially this can be a preventative measure for people as well, because we know this kind of lifestyle over time leads to chronic illness and all kinds of different complications.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I think back to my first recognizing my own issue around emotional eating, how I would say I came to recognize that was that when I came home and felt depleted and had eaten everything, so then had like the sugar crash, I wasn't being present with my kids. And that was the thing that actually was my stop, pause, what are you doing? If they're speaking to you at night and you didn't listen or hear a word they said, this is not the kind of mom I want to be. That's not the kind of mom I've ever been. And I want to be here and be present and actually experience all the highs and lows of being a mom, and not just be zoned out when I come home because I'm so strung up on sugar that I can't even think straight, or not able to know how to manage my emotions so that I can't think straight. So for sure, it's so much more than just what is my body weight or what is my blood pressure. You don't want to really, hopefully, be at that point of having a consequence. You want to recognize it beforehand. And when you think of all of us as healthcare professionals, recognizing that most Canadians have increased their intake of junk food over the pandemic as a response to stress, we're all emotionally eating right now. That's fine. But like you say, we want to take that pause and recognize, what is it that I'm doing? Is this serving me? Why am I doing it? How can I stop doing it? What is it that I actually need? And sometimes having some coaching around figuring that out and getting things back on track is invaluable, because the power of, once you've gotten into that cycle, the power of the desire for the next hit of dopamine or the next piece of food to buffer the next thing is really high, intense and really high. And it can take a bit of a structure like a Whole30 or a bit of coaching where somebody is able to interrupt that cycle and say, let's pause, let's figure out what's going on, so that you can get to a point where you've stopped it before there's ever any health consequence, not to mention of course the emotional consequence that you want to reverse as well.
So for you, as someone who has been through this and you've recognized it, and you have now, I assume you follow the Whole30 diet, and you kind of have been through the whole psychology of it. How has this been life-changing for you? How has this changed your outlook on food and on life?
Well, I quit my job. I mean, so I mean, as I made that realization, the first thing I did was say, I want a career in this. Like, I want to help other people be able to convert and feel the way I do compared to how I did. So I moved to a place where I did part-time hospital pharmacy and part-time running my coaching. So I mean, that was a huge thing to just pick up and leave a full-time permanent job after 20 years. It was profound enough for me to say, I need to help other people with this. What I've done up to now is help people with their medication. And that is so important. Western medicine, thank God for Western medicine. But I have a calling to do something else, to balance that work of working in oncology and working with diabetes patients and working with COPD patients. I have a balance to work with prevention in people who don't ever want to be my recurring patient in the hospital.
That's right.
So that's one piece. For me personally, I came home and spent time with the kids, was present when we have a dinner table conversation, and not so fixated on the food that I could actually enjoy the company around me. Not feel like food was always like, oh my God, I need that, or I want that. Like, that desire disappeared. And what that leaves is space for growth in other ways. So, starting your own business when you are not of an entrepreneurial background, you have some space to do that. You have the willingness to take risk because your mind is clear and your body feels good.
The energy.
For sure. I mean, sleep is prioritized and it always has been. So, I track my sleep every night. It's like 8 hours on the dot every single night, same bedtimes, like that. I get up and I feel like I'm a superhuman because of that ability to have restful sleep. And for Whole30, the intent is after you do a Whole30, you then systematically reintroduce some of the foods that are not likely to have any emotional attachment, so that you have a little bit more diversity. So I eat Whole30 plus legumes, which are actually taken out during Whole30, plus some dairy, so my diet isn't restricted. I don't feel restricted, but do I put sugar in my diet on a regular basis? No, like it's out. If it is, it's planned ahead of time. It's actually planned as something that I call a joy eat. So it's not that I say to myself, I can never, ever have sugar again. You can't have it. I can have it anytime I want, but I choose not to have it most of the time. And with that comes the health benefits of living in a right-sized body, of being able to move my body the way I want, of having mental clarity, of having good sleep, and of being able to balance being a mom, being a spouse, being a pharmacist, being a professor, being a business owner, and all of it feeling good. And if the feeling of I'm overwhelmed comes up, which for sure, you're a mom and a pharmacist, it does, right? I have the tools to be able to sit with that discomfort and feel my way through it and not use food as a tool to manage it. And I think of an example of, recently I had, because we were online for our pharmacology course that I teach, I had 200 presentations to mark because I had them do it individually instead of groups, which that was my bad in hindsight. But, there was this feeling of overwhelm, like I have 200 presentations to mark and I've got to get it done. And oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed.
Right.
Stop, pause.
Yeah.
And being able to, sit in the overwhelm, but then move through it and not say, I must have wine or chips or food or something to get me through the fact that I have 200 presentations to mark. Whereas before, for sure, the answer to that would have been chips and chocolate.
Yeah.
Right? 200 papers or presentations, for sure, that deserves, probably 2 bags of chips and maybe some chocolate too. So it's just a different, a tool pack, to be able to pull out, to not be like a superhero, superhuman who never ever feels emotion or never ever has emotion come up where your thoughts suggest that maybe food is the answer. That's still going to happen for all of us, but having the tools to be able to pause and say, but is this really what you want right now? Is this really what you need? Is food going to be the answer to solve your emotional dilemma at this time? And if the answer is no, then let's just figure out the dilemma. Let's figure out what to think differently, maybe to be able to have a different feeling. Maybe if it's an emotion that's intense, it deserves to be felt. And for some people, that's really uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah.
That takes work. And for me, as like that, just the science brained person who didn't really want to have emotion come into play, that took work to allow discomfort and that be okay. So teaching other people how to do that, especially professionals who, are just by the book and not really wanting to have that space, it takes practice. It takes compassion as well.
Yeah.
You really do have to be kind to yourself on any journey of growth and self-discovery, because we're imperfect. We're going to be imperfect on that journey, and that's just fine.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you've seen incredible results from your clients, even your own experience, right? And it can start at just small steps, right? We don't have to go and change our whole, the entire diet or our whole mindset. I mean, this is something that happens. It's a process, right? It sounds like even for you personally, it was a process. It was something that you kind of gradually, you were able to make changes. Now, I know, Laura, that you have a lot going on. So Laura is on Instagram. I follow her on Instagram, and where can we find you, Laura, if someone wants to talk to you or is interested in hearing more about your the work that you do?
Yeah, for sure. So I am on Instagram, Your Highest Self Coaching, and I think you'll probably put the links in our interview for that.
Yeah.
My website is www.yourhighestself.ca. And for sure, anyone can just send me an email too, right? It's laura@yourhighestself.ca. But I'm everywhere. I have a Facebook page called Your Highest Self, which you do have to be careful. There is a keto Your Highest Self page, and I'm
okay.
not a keto proponent. So I'm Your Highest Self coaching. I have a emotional eating Facebook group that's free as well. That's called Conquering Emotional Eating Facebook group. So if you start on one of those platforms, you'll find me on all of them. But the website kind of takes you everywhere you need to find as well. And of course, you can just email me directly. You can message me on Instagram directly. I'm pretty easy to find, and I'm happy to respond to anybody who hears a little bit of themselves in my story, or just in the story of some of the clients whom I've had, where they started from a place where emotional eating controlled everything about their lives, and they've resulted in a place where their emotional relationship with food is neutral. And if you're here, but you want to be here and you're not quite sure what the in-between is, I'm happy to chat with you.
Yeah. And also I think that, and I've even considering doing this, Laura, I don't know, but people think that, coaching or this type of, I don't want to call it a product, but service that you're offering is extremely expensive. And I mean, you mentioned to me when we chatted the other day that you have one program, I think it's your 5-day sugar detox. Was it $10 USD or something, right?
You're right.
I mean, that's the cost of a few chocolates or a
like one night
Starbucks frappuccinos.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, the way that I've structured, which has taken a little bit of time as I've gone on this journey myself, is to have a starting place be that 5-day sugar detox for $10, which is so much more than sugar in that program. It's all about why do I self-sabotage? How would I feel my feelings instead of eat them? How do I tell the difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger? What are the ways that one self-sabotages? What is emotional eating, and how do I know if I'm doing it? Like, everything is inside of that program to just get you started to know, is this for me? Do I resonate with her without having to spend a fortune? So the other thing that is kind of the next step from that is that I run group Whole30 coaching. And I do that usually 3 times a year in January, May, and September, specifically for emotional eaters, so that everybody in that group is on the same page with some Zoom calls, some daily videos. And because there's a group, the cost of that is totally affordable for most people. There are people who then go on to my food freedom group, hoping to do a Way Less, Live More group that I've in the works of developing as a separate thing from Whole30, hopefully by the new year. But then some of those clients who've done that group work then continue on in one-on-one. And then I have other clients who just say, I don't want the group work. I don't want to do the chatting with other people. I don't want to be in a Facebook group. I just want to talk to you one-on-one. And so, I have, and particularly what I find with that is, physicians, perhaps people who are like, have a lawyer. So they're kind of people who just maybe don't literally don't have the time to watch a bunch of little videos or come on to Zoom calls at specific times, but that one-on-one is what's for them. And there's a cost associated with that. It's not typically covered by insurance, so it's not for everybody. I like people to start at the journey of just doing the little programs first, getting some of that background knowledge, get a feel for me in a group setting. And then you want to keep working on it. Like I said, with the one-on-one client who's down 55, 60 pounds, she started with me in sugar detox, and has worked her way to one-on-one, where she's continuing to lose 1, 2, 3 pounds a week as she gets closer to her goal. So that is the kind of natural transition. But the other thing I guess I didn't say to you is, inside that website, or pretty much anywhere you go on my social media platforms, you can book a free discovery call. So if you're like, I don't know what I need, I can't figure out from this discussion what I need, that link is readily accessible to just book a call, whether it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or even an hour if it's the one-on-one that you're looking to go to. That's absolutely a great option too.
Yeah, and I will have all the links to all of Laura's social media places and spaces in the description of this interview. Laura, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been very enlightening, and it's something that is so relevant. I mean, all of us have overeaten during this pandemic. I think the percentage of us that haven't is very, very small. And it's great to hear, you're a pharmacist, you know all about medications. You've seen the effects of, poor lifestyle choices, right? And how medications work, but you also now have this side of knowledge about nutrition and emotional eating, which is something that is really kind of, I think, of utmost importance, especially at this time, during the pandemic and as we exit the pandemic, right? Is there anything else you kind of want to, a message that you want to leave to Canadians or to people around the world who might be watching this, and just kind of, they can totally relate to this, and they've gained weight, and we're all wondering, how are we going to fit into our jeans, like.
Yeah. I mean, I think where you start is compassion with yourself, kindness with yourself, honestly tuning into a little bit of self-love as you start the journey of recovery now, as we see the light at the end of the tunnel and come out the other side. If you try to fix what has gone wrong during the pandemic by hating yourself thin or by resisting your way there, it's going to be painful. And I can guarantee you it's also not going to be successful. You might have temporary success, but it's going to revert. So finding a way to love yourself and be okay with the imperfection of all of us through this terribly trying time. And also, just being fully committed to the journey. If you want to get back on track, then fully commit to yourself that I deserve this. I am deserving of good health. Instead of saying, I've got to get my crap together so that I can feel better, you want to say, I deserve to be in a body that serves me, and I love myself enough to get there. And that might sound crazy if you are somebody who hates the way they look right now or hates the way they feel. But I can guarantee if you can find yourself a way to that space where I'm going to love myself to the result, you'll, first of all, have a much more enjoyable experience getting there, but you'll also be much more successful.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Laura. Thank you so much. I think compassion for ourselves is really important. It's so easy to judge ourselves, and it's so easy, like you said, your mind speaks to you, and it's usually in a very negative way, right? And so recognizing that, having a bit of compassion frees you to kind of take the next step and look at things from a preventative lens. And also just kind of realizing that you deserve this. You deserve better. You deserve for your body to be serving you better. And there is a way to change that. So thank you so much. This has been really encouraging. I've definitely enjoyed it. And everyone go to Laura's page, Instagram, Facebook. She's all over the place. We'll put the links. Your Highest Self Coaching. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Lindsay. When you talked about the chatter in your brain and that negative talk, it makes me think of the way that I describe that is like your unruly toddler. So when you're speaking to her, speak to her the way you'd kindly speak to your child, right? As opposed to the way that you would speak to somebody whom you despise. And you'll get a long way. So I'm happy to see everybody on Instagram, on Facebook, on a discovery call, whatever it might be. I appreciate you reaching out to me and giving me the opportunity to chat with you today. It's been great fun.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much, Laura, for your time.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.